G'day humans, Chris Stead from Finder here. We're always talking NFT games, but we are going to do something a little bit different in this session. We're going to ask the question, what is Web3? So at Finder we have a global team, humongous team. We're always trying to be on the cutting edge of tech, right? So we have a lot of internal meetings, internal briefings. We've got so many really smart people at this company, and we just did one recently where we spoke about what is Web3. We tried to make sure that all of our staff were on top of this big revolution in the internet experience. And I found it really, really interesting, and it offered some really, really interesting analogies on how to understand and explain what Web3 is. So I thought, why don't I cut some of that up and provide it to you guys so that you too can get upskilled a little bit on what Web3 is and assimilate what that means, not only for cryptocurrency and blockchain, but the NFT games, which rely so heavily on that technology as well. So without further ado, let's jump in and learn a little bit more about Web3.
Just want to quickly introduce the panel guests today. We've got James Edwards, who is the Finder crypto editor based in Sydney. James, say hello just so everyone knows who you are.
Hi.
Cool. We got James O'Donoghue, or Donny, as I will probably call him to differentiate him from the other James, Ventures product leader on Wallet. You want to say good day, Donny?
Hello, everyone.
We've got Parth Gulati, who is the Venture product manager. Parth, hello.
Hey, team.
And we've got Tegan Jones, who is the editor of Gizmodo, but of course now the global reviews publisher here at Finder. Tegan, do you want to say hello?
Hi, I got upgraded to publisher and now I'm getting my contract changed.
Oh, there you go.
No, I'm just an editor, but I'll take publisher.
I wanted to start just by asking all of our panelists if they've got like a 30-second version of what is Web3, because that's a question we've gotten from a couple of the surveys already. This terminology is totally new to me. What is it? James Edwards, do you want to start us off? What's your version of Web3? And maybe just start with what Web 1 and 2 is as well.
Yeah, so I think if we start with Web 2, which is the current era, and it probably began around the time of the social media boom. So in Web 2, you typically have, or you definitely do have, an identity that follows you around whether you know it or not. So that might be through the use of tracking cookies, or it could just be through the same email that you use to log in, or maybe you're using something like Facebook and Google to log into lots of different services around the web. And through this, publishers are able to give you a very personalized or completely personalized experience, as well as highly targeted and influential advertising. And so sort of Web 2 is kind of customized to fit you. It's like a customized web experience. And that's one of the things that sets it apart from Web 1. And another part of Web 2 is that it's very interactive. So you've got stuff like rich web apps like Netflix, Google Office products, YouTube, and software that runs in your browser, say, for instance, Canva. And whereas Web 1, I describe it as it was like point and click. It was like a point and click experience. You go to a web page, you read it, maybe sign up for a mailing list, maybe leave a comment. There were images, GIFs, and video, but they were all delivered in a very static way with no real interaction with the media and not that much interaction with the actual page itself. And then Web 3 is starting to emerge, and it's still evolving, and there's no real concrete definition. I think we're all going to give definitions what it is. But overall, I hope that it's going to be a more efficient, more interconnected web, but still more anonymous than what we've had previously in Web 2. So almost less monoliths and more people power coming back to the web like it used to be in the early days. And at the moment, it revolves a lot around decentralized services like cryptocurrency and decentralized applications. And those decentralized applications don't necessarily need cryptocurrency. They just leverage the same technology. And yeah, some might say it's the metaverse, those sorts of things as well. So yeah, personally, I hope that it will mean a web of greater privacy, sort of less tracking, things are decentralized more. There's less of these, Googles and Facebooks that are owning everything. And then another thing is called composability, which is the ability for various applications and services to easily integrate with each other and enhance functionality to create new experiences. And I think Parth might actually talk quite a bit about composability.
Sure. Well, Parth, that's my next question. Whether you want to talk about composability now or later, but what would be your Web3 definition if you had to give it in 30 seconds?
You're going to be?
Yeah.
So I can on cue start with composability. So composability or interoperability is like one of the things that is that defines Web3. So what I mean by that is, I'll give an example. Right now, and like, we're still, let's say we're in the Web2 world and where are the boundaries, but imagine there's a hotel, like it's called Facebook or maybe it's called Google. You go there, and when you enter the hotel, they give you a set of clothes, right? So you put these clothes on, you're like walking around the hotel, it's awesome. And then, maybe you go somewhere and give you a robe, and then you want to leave the hotel. You're going to leave Hotel Facebook, you're going to go to Hotel Google. But what Hotel Facebook says to you is when you're leaving, it's like, hey, you got to take all your clothes off, right? That's what it feels like. That's what Web2 is. And you go to Hotel Google and they'll give you a different set of clothes, and you have to be like, what the heck? Like, why can't I take my clothes from Hotel Google to Facebook? It's the same world, right? That's what the internet feels like now. And in Web3, what interoperability means is that you don't have to do that, right? You can have the same clothes in Hotel Facebook and Hotel Google and whatever other hotel or other venues that you decide to visit. And that is like an awesome thing. Like in gaming, it's probably the most obvious example. You might be able to take like a sword from one game to other, right? Web2 creates the opportunity for things like that to happen. So that's what composability or interoperability is. That's one example. There's other examples, like in the way that it technically applies, but that's an analogy just to think about the concept. A couple other things, like while I've got the mic, I'll say as well, is one thing that's really important that is also like an emerging philosophy of Web3 is community ownership. And I think that is enabling a lot of governance experiments. So like, just imagine if Uber wasn't owned like a central entity, right, that created the marketplace. What if it was owned by the drivers and the riders? And so that's kind of something, and one of the biggest shifts in Web3 that enables this kind of ownership of networks by the users or the community of those networks is the token. So what the token allows you to do is it gives you a claim to the cash flows, among other things, or like governance for a protocol. And so, for example, in the case of Uber, imagine if riders and drivers owned it, they could say that they could actually go in and put proposals on what they should change that might actually start to benefit them way more than the central entity, right, that controls the network. And that is, for me, like another really big emerging property of Web3 that's different to Web2, quite fundamentally. So yeah, there's a few other things, but I think those are the two things I just want to call out that are really important for me.
Absolutely. I'm going to flip it a little bit, as I want to do. Obviously, I find the root prospect of Web3 very exciting, especially everything that James and Path has to say. But I suppose as both a journalist and as a regular person who exists so strongly online, as many of us do, I do have concerns around its aims, which are very pure, and how they might be co-opted and corrupted by tech giants and traditional financial institutions that already exist. This idea of a decentralized web is very attractive. It always has been. And in a way, the different iterations of the internet were always supposed to provide power, anonymity, and decentralization to regular people. But it has always fallen to this capitalist model, I suppose, that society is built on. And I think that Web3 really does have a danger of this happening as well. Its foundations are built on the blockchain and crypto, which are already being co-opted by big businesses and financial institutions. So even though the narrative around and terms being thrown around like decentralized, that's the main thing that's being focused on, I think, in the mainstream, rather than the technology and the architecture and the possibility. And instead, what's mostly being talked about in the mainstream is around profit. So crypto success stories and teenagers making bank off NFTs. And I think it was James that mentioned the metaverse as well. Like, it's being so strongly tied to this idea of the metaverse, a concept that started as an online utopia in the early 90s and is now being spearheaded by one of the biggest tech companies in the world, which is Facebook, that has myriads of problems when it comes to user privacy and the spread of misinformation, which are things that Web3 aims to solve. And, big companies are already looking at how they can profit from the metaverse. So while I'm very strongly on board with Web3 and what it can be, I am concerned about how it can be warped. But, and there's a but, I think this is where Finder has a great opportunity to lead the way and do what we do best, which is serve our members.
Donnie, do you want to finish us up on this introduction to Web3? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess it's a good point you make, Tegan, around what will happen with the existing powers at play. But I think if you look at there's going to be multiple people with different views on what Web3 is, what it means to them, and then you're going to have multiple interests trying to steer the definition of what Web3 is, right? And so I think with Facebook, we're yet to see if they make a full pivot and change of heart, but there is almost an expectation that they won't be making a play that is what the crypto market views as a Web3 play. And so I think if we roll back a little bit, we've got, the blockchain as an enabling technology, and what it enables is trust. And there's, incentives for that trust to come in a way that we can all have comfort in, right? Decentralized, global actors, independently owned and spread out, all securing a blockchain. And now we go, great, we can trust this thing because no one's in charge. And so the first use case that we've seen is crypto and finance related activity on the blockchain. And so it's always talking, things about threats to the traditional finance models of the world. I think where Web3 comes in is when you have other ecosystems use the blockchain for that trust component. So like an app where maybe it's an Uber and maybe the participants own the distribution of how revenue gets spent, right? The community might own a share through tokens and they might vote. But, someone that builds up, if it's in this decentralized ecosystem, they build up a 5-star trust rating, right? Rather than leaving the Uber hotel and not being able to take their trust score with them, in the Web3 ecosystem, they can go and just start using a different platform, and they own that trust score that they've built because they own that individually. There's no centralized entity where that sits. So all they need is another platform to recognize their trust score from this ecosystem over into another one. I think for me, Web3 is it's where you have decentralized applications come about, and on top of that, crypto is native into these ecosystems. So you have a lot more pipeline and flow for finance to tick along and to make things work.
Parth, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely not planned, but I'll extend on that final point that Donnie just made, right? So I've got one more analogy, hopefully it's useful. So back in the day, the rail lines, right, the gauges used to be different between states and countries. And I think if you think about how money and value moves today, that's the world we're in. Right. So when money leaves Australia and goes into a different country, right? It has to change gauges. So it has to leave the train, get into a different bank's train, and then has to go and arrive over there. Now there's networks like Visa and MasterCard and so on that try to put band-aids on those things, and we pay heavy tax to those people. I'm not saying blockchain transactions are free, but they're band-aids, right? They're built on top to try and solve these problems. What blockchains allow is it's a global rail. Right, it's one rail or a set of rails, right? So Bitcoin is a set of rails, Ethereum might be a set of rails, is whatever. And even they can interoperate, right? There's technology that's being built that allows potentially networks to interoperate with each other. And in that world, what you can get is much more seamless native value transfer without requiring as many intermediaries. Because guess what? You don't have to get off at the station, go into another station, go in another train. If you use that analogy, there's all of these people or entities that need to exist to create that train, maintain that new gauge, and so on. So it's just far more efficient, more global. And if you now take another critical lens, that is why you're seeing so many of those intermediaries actually resisting this tech, because it poses a massive threat to the power structures they've literally spent hundreds of years putting into place around money. And so that's where a lot of the resistance is coming from. It's explainable. And how graceful the transition and so on is going to be, we don't know. But I just wanted to make that point about the value transfer rails being global for the first time, I think, in the history of the world with Web3 and with crypto.
Yeah. If you think that Facebook is going to move to a model where users own all of the value that they're creating on the platform, it's not going to happen. They're not going to give that fundamental, it's literally the core of their business model to monetize what people bring to that platform. They can say metaverse, they can say Web3 all they want. Until I see a public, transparent, open source, permissionless play, they're not going the direction that we're talking about when we're talking about Web3.
Yeah, and I think that sort of almost talks back to Tegan's point about this idea that Web3 has a lot of promise, but then it's also about people like us, companies like us, shaping that promise to make sure that we hopefully get to that more decentralized future if we want it.
That it is what it actually is meant to be, rather than the narrative that's being spun around it.
So there you go, guys. A bit of an insight about Web3 from the brains at Finder. I hope you found it as insightful as I did and really, really interesting. So make sure you go check out finder.com.au website if you want to see how Web3 and the future of the internet is going to unfold. That's the place to check it out. Otherwise, make sure you check out the rest of my NFT games related videos so you can also keep your head and your finger on the pulse of this exciting, amazing new future that's coming our way.